Carried away there, sorry about that. Meanwhile, well, back on home planet, I say I haven't been straight, 'cause this is not my body, this is not my shape. I've been back into a jellyfish suspended off the floor, and you say, hey, baby, that just turns me on some more. And then you start laughing, and you say, you won't believe it, and you turn into the cutest jellyfish I've ever seen. You say you've been stranded on Earth for 10 years alone. You say, I've got to thank you for taking me home, and I feel the world turning around and around. I can see the stars fly around and around, and the lessons I'm learning turn round and around. My head is floating in the sky, yeah, yeah. I can feel the world turn around and around. I can see the stars fly around and around, and the lessons I'm learning turn round and around. My head is floating in the sky, in the sky, in the sky, yeah. I think that may be it. Is that it, Jeff? How are we doing? I think
we've got time for another song.
Time for another song. I can give you half a song because we probably
about 5 more minutes.
Hey, how many minutes?
We can probably run up until 5 to the hour.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Which song shall I do for you then? I might move you then in that case.
26 people.
26 people. I can carry 26 people. That does say something, doesn't it? I will sing you a pretty one. It's off my most recent album. There's only 2 Filkish songs on it. It's called We're All Astronauts. And this is called Astronauts. And I got the idea from Richie Havens, who I saw, actually opened for him once, bless him, name drop. And he was a lovely guy. And he said at a concert, he was bemoaning the fact that all the countries of the world in America were spending billions and billions to get man into space. And in his great hippie way said, well, we already are, man. And I thought, yeah, this is it. This is our ship. We are all astronauts, and this is where this comes from. I'll leave you with this. We're all astronauts on a beautiful ship. It's the only one we've got that'll look after. We're all passengers, and we're all the crew, and it's a one-way trip, so enjoy the view. There's a man alone, staring at his phone. He wants to take his brain outside of this computer train. Something more than this, something better than this. She's weary eyes that only realize we're all astronauts on a beautiful ship. It's the only one that'll look after him. We're all passengers, and we're all the crew, and it's a one-way trip, so enjoy the view. If only you could see, orbiting around the star, it's orbiting a galaxy, light years from where you are, and way beyond your blue, galaxies moving too. We're on a ship together, and we're flying forever, 'cause we're all astronauts on a beautiful ship. It's the only one we've got that'll look after. We're all passengers, and we're all the good. It's a one-way trip, so enjoy the view. Fly with me. Best is yet to see. Fly with me. Hold on, hold on. So if the everyday is eating your mind away, you can turn it around. Don't look down, look up at the stars. Remember where you are, and when it strikes a chord, then we're all aboard, 'cause we're all astronauts on a beach. It's the only one that'll look after it, and we're all passengers, and we're all the crew, and it's a one-way trip, so enjoy the view. Fly forever, forever and ever and ever. You fly with me. Hold on, hold on. On a beautiful ship. Thank you very much, NASFIC 2020. Very nice to be with you here from Leicester, UK, the centre of England here. And have a great rest of your con. And it's been a real pleasure. And I know my good friend Marilisa Altanasa will be with you tomorrow, I think around similar time. So catch her. She's groovy.
Okay, Chris, if you wanted to chat with some of the people, they're over on Discord at Auditorium Even.
We just don't want to do that, and then suddenly we had to do that, and the accommodations that had been asked for so long for so many people were suddenly available. So yeah, now we're in the digital thing, and we're looking at yes, here are other issues that we need to address, like having protections to make sure that racists don't get into random Zoom calls, which, you know, the introduction of the lobby helped with that, as Ben was talking about in our pre-panel conversation. So there are new challenges that evolve with the digital stuff. And I think, but one of the more positive things I think that's come out of this recently is that you are getting conventions that are starting in the digital era. So after the whole Hugo debacle, we've now, and George R.R. Martin failing to pronounce Fire magazine correctly, we've now got FireCon, which is the inaugural convention being held inaugurally online by Fire magazine, and they've started their own awards ceremony, which is the Ignite Awards. And I think that's amazing. And I think that's a really fantastic idea, that you've got a group of people who are in some respects much more familiar with the kind of accommodations that should be made with technology, who have been very quick to look at the Hugo ceremony and say, well, here are the things that this convention did wrong. Here's the thing that this ceremony did wrong. Let's start our convention by fixing that in a digital sphere. And then presumably at some point, once the pandemic has passed, assuming a new evil doesn't rear up its head to keep us all in our houses indefinitely, we'll be able to progress from a digital realm to the physical. And I think that could be a really fascinating and interesting way for particularly more marginalized creators and convention runners and ideas like that to get off the ground, by sort of testing the waters digitally and saying, do we have an audience for this content? Here's how we wrangle it in this space. Because even prior to now, a lot of the con running stuff has been digitally enabled in terms of, as Ben was saying, people around the world having to collaborate. So if you start off in a purely digital sphere and then you move to the physical, what's that going to look like for conventions?
Yeah. Well, we started the process in some sense many decades ago with figuring out ways of accommodating that. Things like TAF were invented specifically in an attempt to, after Walt Willis was brought over on a special fan fund to Chi-Con in '52, people said, gee, it would be useful if we can get North American fandom and European fandom to familiarize themselves with each other. And yes, fanzines are great. Most of the contact is still going to be fanzines because it's a lot cheaper to send 30 pages of paper than to send a real person. But, you're looking at 70 years ago, we decided we needed to try and do things to bring people together. And as the technologies have evolved and changed the relative costs and, quite frankly, the relative income of fandom. In 1960, there was an enormous controversy when the Worldcon doubled in price. It went from $1 to $2. But even in constant dollars, you don't see that sort of cheap Worldcon anymore. But we've been developing new technologies, and usually they start out actually on the participatory side. Convention staffs start to become international. Convention guests and program participants start to become more international. And then the attendance starts to show those changes. I mean, the Worldcon went to its first non-English speaking country, although mostly everybody there did speak English, only in 1970 with Heidelberg. Before that, it had been in the UK and it had been in Canada.
And they do speak English in the UK, I understand.
It's certainly close to American. It's a language very similar to American. Mm-hmm. And although one of my favorite memories from a Worldcon was in Holland in 1990. We had an American fan from the Deep South with a very, very, very Southern accent. And we had a Scot with mostly Glaswegian, but a little bit of other traces of accent. And they were trying to speak to each other in English, and neither one of them understood a word that the other was saying until a Dutch fan came over and who is a non-native English speaker, and he was translating from one native English speaker speaking English to another native English speaker speaking English. I love Worldcons.
Nicholas, you had something that I cut you off with before?
Yeah, I had two things. I mean, the first thing was to say that on the narrow point of the Hugos, that I was deeply dismayed by the way the ceremony unfolded and my efforts to get pronunciations, of which you're aware of, Foz, because you were one of the finalists this year as well. Somehow, no,
I wasn't this year.
Oh, I beg your pardon. But so, somehow the efforts we'd made did not get transmitted internally, and we're still kind of questioning internally how it happened. But the broader point I want to make is, and the mention of Walt Willis brings me back to it, and I grew up in the same city as Walt Willis in Belfast in the worst times because he was 50 years older than me. And for me as a teenager growing up in that situation, science fiction was awfully important as a way of escaping from this very, very narrow society with a very small-minded set of people doing small things, which sometimes has rather awful consequences for individuals, and to look at a wider culture. And I think fandom is at its best when it enables people to communicate beyond where they are at the moment, but also about where they are at the moment, and to broaden the horizons of everybody that comes into it. I think that's really important. And one of the things that I hope does not get lost in the new style of pandemics is that I hope that conventions both become a bit more global, as we've been discussing, but also retain their sense of locality. And that's quite important. And I don't resent the fact that, you know, I whined about it a bit earlier, but of course the Hugo ceremony was going to be in the middle of the night for me when the convention's in Con Zealand. 2 years out of 3, the Hugo ceremony is in the middle of the night for me. But, you know, I follow it all the time anyway, because I'm like that. But I think that I don't think conventions should feel obliged to try and adopt a global timescale. I think instead they should adopt their own local characteristics and try and parlay that into a more global perspective. And I agree, I would have liked to have seen a bit more of that at the start of the month. And I think it's something, you know, in a globalized society where everybody can jump in and out, you have to think, what's your local contribution going to be? What's the contribution you make from where you're sitting, both geographically and in terms of wider society. And I think that's where we add value. That's where we learn from each other.
Agreed. Very much agreed.
The Worldcon has traditionally always been a merger of two communities. It's been a merger of the local culture of the local area, the people who are part of the locale where the Worldcon is located. And they've developed a fanish culture because they're the ones who brought it to that location. And that's always merged with the tradition of what it means to be a Worldcon, which is in part vaguely written down, but is also carried forward by the community of people who attend and work on Worldcons, no matter where that Worldcon is. So that's always a tricky synthesis. And I am hopeful that as our communications tools continue to improve, that merger will be easier to accomplish, that you aren't going to be banging heads quite as often with a two cultures clash. But this also leads to, I guess, the second half of this panel, and that is, what do we see as, what are the trends that we are likely to see over the next few years, few decades? What effects are we going to see there? Foz, why don't we quickly go in the order that we started? So
I think it's going to be, I mean, a lot of it is going to depend on how quickly or not, as the case very well may be, the pandemic is resolved, and what we're sort of looking like as a community, both local communities and global communities, when we come out of it. Talking about sort of future Worldcon bids, for instance, I know people, and with reason, people were very upset with the prospect of a Jeddah bid. And on the one hand, yes, it would be lovely to have a convention in that part of the world and to bring in sort of Middle Eastern fandom. At the same time, it would have been an incredibly dangerous location to physically attend for queer people, for certain people of color, for women, basically, given some of the local rules. And people have the same criticisms now going forward when you're looking at what else has happened in 2020, saying, well, can we actually say that America as a convention location is safe for international fans, particularly people of color? Frequently, no, it's not. There's a bid for Chengdu in China. Can we say that China is safe for people to attend in terms of what could happen if you speak out about certain things, or if you are deemed to hold certain opinions? No, you can't guarantee that. And the cynical part of me wants to say, have you seen every government in the world? Like we can't be, you can't look around the globe and go, all right, where is the one true perfect government? I'd be inclined to point at New Zealand at this point in time and be like, yes, Jacinda Ardern will keep us all safe with her sensible policies and her lack of fascism. But on the one hand, yes, you do have to grapple with this, the terrible reality that not every country is going to be, like, there's not going to be a perfect country, but some problems are more pressing to attendees than others. And given I don't think you can really, I mean, this is a kind of dark arc to take things on, but I don't think you can extricate global political leadership from the pandemic at the moment. And when I'm talking about how conventions will look, or how fandom will look when we come out the other side of the pandemic, I think a large factor in that is, what are various governments going to look like? What are countries going to look like after this? Without getting too science fictional about it, the US is the obvious example to point to, but it is very, very apparent that the pandemic is changing how people react to their governments. And we have, I don't know if it's just this particular point in history, if we've reached a point where injustices suppressed for so long have built up and built up and built up, and finally are being publicly addressed. If it's a combination of that, plus the fact that so many people are out of work and can protest, if it's the fact that people are scared, and so various governments around the world are becoming more fascist, are becoming something else. And I think, this ties into fandom in the idea that, particularly with Nicholas talking about growing up in Belfast and the importance of science fiction and fantasy as a way to escape that, without wanting to insert science fiction, fantasy, and storytelling into the Maslow's hierarchy of needs regarding, wider political chaos, pandemics. These are times, I think, when stories and the community that we build around stories are particularly important, and that will continue to be important. And it is, I think it's all inextricably tied together. And so if we're looking at what will conventions look like, we still don't know what in some cases, given that large parts of America are currently on fire, much like most of Australia was on fire not that long ago, you're looking at it going, what's the actual landscape going to look like? Are there going to be certain cities that are going to not survive this? Are they going, or which will be drastically altered? I could go on in this vein for some time. Clearly, I'll let somebody else speak. But yeah, for me, I think that's all kind of knotted together.
Isabel?
So for me, a recurring issue is race and representation. This is not something new that just happened with Jeanette's Hugo acceptance speech last year. I still have a very visceral physical reaction whenever someone says race fail. That happened in 2009, and I hear that, and I remember that. I remember being involved. I remember feeling unsafe. I remember feeling really fucking angry. And every time that I think, or that people of color think, okay, finally, people are paying attention. This brought a light to this horrible thing that is happening. And so now we're going to be able to go forward and things are going to get better. And then it doesn't. And we're like, of course it's not going to get better. What the hell were we thinking? Right? Like we do this every time. It's like we hope and we get excited and and sure enough, we're like, I can't believe I fell for it again. And so every time this happens, it's really frustrating. And this year with the horrific Hugo Awards, Hugo ceremony, not moderation, hosting, is that finally the straw that breaks the camel's back? Is it because it happened during this pandemic, during this time of Black Lives Matter? Is this when it's finally really going to happen? Or will Robert Silverberg still be presenting at the Hugos next year? Right? Like, if that man doesn't disappear from fandom, I want to ask everybody why. Why the fuck is he still around? Right? So next year, is it really going to be different? Because I really want it to be. But I have seen this movie before and I know how it ends, right? And so how is fandom going to change next year? How are we going to take the lessons of what we have learned and learned again and learned again and apparently haven't actually learned? And how are we going to go forward with that, given that fandom is changing? The people who are winning the Hugo Awards are not old white guys anymore. Okay, that is the direction that fandom is going. We now have FIA, not FIA, FIA. Okay, we now have FIACon. We have the Ignite Awards. We have a lot of young people in fandom. This is the direction. This is the future. And so when is fandom going to get on board with that? That's what I want to know.
It is very, just you talking about not learning, the two things that sprang to mind, one is Lucy continually pulling away the football from Charlie Brown.
Yes.
Yeah, that is how you every time you're like, yes, this time it's finally and then you're on your back and the football hasn't moved. And the other thing is telling my 7-year-old to stop clicking his Lego together when he sits in the lounge room. Right. He'll sit there and it's just making this bang, 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 and you ask him to stop, and he'll stop for 2 seconds and then do it again. And it's this repeated thing where he doesn't even seem to notice that he's doing it. He's like, yes, I'll stop, and he'll say, I'll stop while he's doing it. But that feels,
Nicholas.
It's just such a real pleasure to do that, Foz. How can you do that? Anyway, but look, we've talked a lot about the Hugo ceremony, and I think not enough about the people who actually won. And Isabel was kind of nudging in that direction. But I think it was a jolly good set of results.
Yes.
In terms of the voting, and the speeches were absolutely fantastic from those who actually won. And I'm sure we've all seen the cut down version of the ceremony with just the speeches from the people who won rather than the other stuff, which is well worth watching. Worth pointing out, I think Max Gladstone was the first white man to have won a Hugo Award for about 5 years.
And I'm okay with that.
And I'm certainly okay with that. It's not like there was no historical imbalance to overturn or anything here. So I think that's really important. I think that on the one hand, it's depressing that we have to have these same arguments over again with people who we thought were on our side. But at the same time, I think the number of these arguments is probably going to decrease, even though it gets equally dispiriting to have to do them over and over again. So that's my sort of prediction. The other thing I wanted to say, totally on a different topic in the last 5 minutes, I think that streaming is really changing the way we're experiencing media. And this evening I just downloaded and watched the second episode of Star Trek Lower Decks, which I don't know if any of you have seen, but it's utterly fantastic. And used to be in the old days, everybody would sit down and watch the television at a particular moment, and we would all go, "Oh my God, he turned into the master." Sorry, Doctor Who reference for you guys. But now, we're all kind of storing it up for a couple of days, and Daenerys turned evil. Yeah, come on, we all knew that. I saw that on Facebook yesterday. That is changing our collective experience of how we're enjoying the media side of science fiction fandom. And I think we haven't yet worked through to the end of that. It's an interesting transition, and I slightly regret it on the one hand, because it was nice to have a collective experience of, oh my God, we all saw that last night. And at the same time, frankly, I'm a gentleman whose time is valuable to me, and I like the idea I can sit down and bloody watch it when I want to. So you know that is a phase shift that has been happening and will continue to happen.
I actually have I have a whole rant about this, which I'm going to compress into
Peace.
very, very quickly. But the fact that the actual nature of the media itself has changed in accordance with the fact that we're no longer stuck to a TV schedule, because the whole idea of sitcom setups and procedural setups that you used and genre setups you used to have was you had to be able to have something that was potentially accessible to new viewers who hadn't seen the previous episodes or the previous season and had no way to catch up with them. So every episode had to potentially be an entry point. So it was really rare when you got like a 2 or 3 episode arc, because you had to be constantly able to invite new things in. But suddenly you then had DVD box sets, and I think that was when it started to change, when people realized, oh, like 24 was a huge thing in that. Oh, suddenly we can tell an ongoing narrative on the assumption that people will be able to catch up. And then streaming happened, and we went, oh, not only can we tell a story on the assumption that people can catch up, we can tell a story on the assumption that they can watch it now. And so it's not just the way we're reacting to the media, it's the structure of the media itself. And having just like binged and now rewatching The Untamed, which is a 50 episode long discrete Chinese fantasy drama, which is amazing. It's on Netflix if you want to watch it. But something like that I don't think could have existed that long ago, particularly when you look at where the episode breaks are. It's just a continuous narrative essentially across 50 episodes, and it suits the streaming era perfectly.
And I suspect the other big change is I expect the publishing industry to collapse over the next decade. Basically, books are moving from physical objects to collections of words. And the publishing industry has not recognized that change. Their pricing model is wrong. And their royalties are wrong. What it means is that an author can make far more money going indie rather than going to one of the big 5 by factors of like 5 and 10 on royalties per book. It means that the new authors are crazy to go to. It means that in many respects, I think the new authors are crazy to go to professional publishers. And I think they're going to recognize that. And we saw a presentation at the Nebulas 3 years ago that said that even 3 years ago, half of the books sold in our genre, by count, not by price, but half of the books sold in our genre were not coming out of the major publishers. They were coming out of indies. And it's just transitioning faster and faster. And what is the science fiction field going to be like when we lose a Tor, or when we lose a DAW, or when we lose any one of the companies that has given us great science fiction for many, many decades? And that is, I think, going to be a real change.
Jumping on that really quick, and I know we're not going to be able to talk about it, but just to suggest everybody go look at the hashtag What Publishing Paid Me. Foz, was that right? What Publishing Paid Me. If you want to talk about publishing, that's a great thing to look at.
And we are out of time, so thank you all very much. And we will be going to the even chat to continue this if people are interested in following it.
Yes, thank you very much to all of you who presented content.